and welcome to the Cracked Pots podcast. I'm Pastor Rebecca.
And I'm Pastor Chad.
And today, the topic we are tackling is why are millennials not in the church and what can we do to get them back?
Dun, dun, dun. The million-dollar question that everybody over 50 asks.
Pretty much.
I mean, pretty much. And I think the millennials have become sort of the whipping boy of older generations.
Yeah, here's the reality. I'm Gen X. You're Gen X.
Yes.
We weren't in the church either.
That's true. Absolutely not.
I mean, I came back to the church in my 30s. And
My wife drugged me back.
yeah. So this isn't a millennial problem. This is also, our generation and younger. And I mean, I can tell you, growing up, why I stopped going to church. It was a couple of different reasons. Number one, it was boring.
Yep.
It was like, oh my gosh, okay, the sermon's finally over. We still have how much to go through before you got done? And I didn't grow up Lutheran. I grew up a hodgepodge of things. We didn't actually go to a Lutheran. My mom and I went to a Lutheran church about the time I was 16. And then I left for quite some time. But also, I think part of the issue is the church has been in a culture war that it doesn't need to be in. The culture war, I think part of what it has been, at least when I was in school, I don't know how many times I had classmates who, for speech class, decided they were going to do a debate type of speech or a persuasive speech regarding creation versus evolution.
So my high school, Dover, Pennsylvania, Dover Area High School, which was the famous Supreme Court case over creationism and whether it should be taught in school or not. So I have that background. I was not there during that debate. That was after I left. That was a huge thing back in my hometown of Dover, Pennsylvania. A shout out to Dover, Pennsylvania, I guess. So I kind of bring that into the equation as well. I did not grow up Lutheran. I was baptized Lutheran.
As was I.
Grew up Methodist. A lot going on in the Methodist church these days. Grew up Methodist and then stopped going to church for many of the same reasons. One, it was boring. Two, I didn't quite get it. It didn't quite add up for me. I didn't see our church doing the things that was presented scripturally. And through the message, I'm like, well, you're preaching this, but we're not really doing it. That didn't seem to make sense. And so I spent 15 or so years not going to church. I met my wife, and she said, maybe we should start going to church. I'm Lutheran, let's go to a Lutheran church. And bam, we went back to a Lutheran church. And then a few years later, seminary, and that whole long journey. But I think it's important to define millennials, or at least attempt to. So millennials, traditionally speaking, typically, and there's a little variation, but born in between 1980 and 2000. Now, some of the articles you read, try and push that back to 1977-ish, which gets closer, a little closer to my birth year. If you do, I remember a few years ago, and I don't know if you did these as well, there were several surveys. What generation do you identify with? And they give you like 10 questions. I almost always aligned in those surveys as a millennial. So maybe I'm just not as grown up as what my
touching that one.
As what my age would say.
So
I think there's many people that would definitely agree with that statement. I'll plead the fifth.
Well, like I said, at least for me, growing up, one of the big challenges was not only was there this big disconnect between what you were learning in church and what you were learning in school, which for me, for whatever reason, I never took the creation story to be literal anyway, so I thought the whole argument was ridiculous and silly. But there were, oh my goodness, people who, just that way. And I was like, well, how do you just ignore science? How do
Right, and
you?
science and religion has always been, for many people, a tension. Well, how do you have science and you have religion? They're incompatible, and in fact, they're not. I was blessed to have a scientist in a former congregation who was deeply, deeply faithful, and for her, that science and that background actually fed her faith. When you talk about creation, and she broke down, we did a Bible study one day, and she broke down scientifically the percentage of everything happening, and it was way over my head. Afterwards, I said, "That was a beautiful presentation. Can you give me like the cliff notes, your presentation for dummies?" Because I needed it, because she was so deeply scientific. But she broke down the percentage of how unlikely it was for creation to start, and her thesis then was that there had to be some divine intervention, some divine push,
Something that got it going.
some nudge that got it going, because mathematically it was almost impossible.
Well, my dad was a doctor. My mother was a medical technologist. I mean, I grew up in science, but I also grew up in faith. So that tension never made sense to me. But as an instructor now, I teach over at Indian River State College. I teach world religions, and it's not surprising to me that I find a lot of students who their big issue is the fact that what they read in the Bible doesn't mesh with what they are learning in the science classroom. And to me, that's a failure of the church.
Yep.
Not the failure, it's not anything science is doing wrong or that our teachers are doing wrong in the schools. It's the church's fault that they haven't given a more robust interpretation and understanding of what is actually going on in that creation story. The other issue is when I got to college, none of my friends were Christian. If they were nominally Christian. I had an atheist that was one of my best friends, Buddhist, Wiccan. And so I was being exposed to all this other stuff, and it wasn't that I personally had quit believing, but I began to question a lot of the whole idea of, well, if they're not Christian, they're going to hell and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, these are beautiful people. I can't. So I guess you might say the intolerance of my faith began to drive me away a little bit from going to it, because it said, hey, all of these friends of yours who believe something different are somehow doomed to suffer for eternity in hell. And I was like, okay.
That's interesting. So by the time I got to college, I had already quit church. And I played baseball in college. And so that was my cohort. I mean, we spent so much time together as a team. And most of us lived in the same dorm. Oh man, that dorm is a whole other story of filth and stench and everything else. We get a bunch of athletes in a dorm, makes for some interesting smells. But anyway, so I had already quit the church, so to speak, when I got to college. Now, interestingly enough, before every game, we would kneel in a circle outside the dugout, and we would say a prayer. Now, the interesting thing, I don't know that you could confuse us very much with a religious. Now, we were a brethren school, I think, technically. But I don't know that much else that happened on the baseball field, in the locker room, in the dugout, you could confuse with religion. And I love my coach. Let's just say there was a lot of colorful language, both from him and from us. But we still, for whatever reason, we did that prayer before each game, which is kind of interesting. So I was looking up some stats this morning. So there was a 2005 study, and they polled 1,300, almost 1,400 millennials, so ages 18 to 25. More than half of them reported that they pray regularly before a meal. And I would guess that the majority of people that sort of beat that drum that millennials are not religious would never guess that. 1/3 of them discuss religion with their friends. Now, it doesn't say whether or not they're bashing religion, but for me, I don't think it matters. I think the fact that it's part of their conversation, I think is really important. 23% do not practice religion. So only 23% of those in this study did not practice religion, and only 3% reported themselves atheist and 4% agnostic. So 25% said that they were nuns, not N-U-N-N-O-N-E-S, as in they don't have a religious affiliation. But that means 75% of millennials are in some way feel affiliated to a religious practice. So when we talk about the doom and gloom of the church and the church in decline, and it's another thing we can kind of pin on millennials and it's their fault. Those are pretty encouraging numbers as a church leader. Say, 75% say they're affiliated in some way, and 25%. Now that 25% number is increasing across society, but for me, that's a hopeful number and not a pessimistic number that sort of points to a decline in the church. So I think we also have to keep in mind the way the world is different since the 80s. So things that have happened since the 80s in terms of shaping who you were. So we have generations in our pews right now, the greatest generation and the wars and all those things. And thank you for your service if you served. But we have this millennial generation that grew up with scandal in government, Iran Contra, those sorts of things, and current day as well. We have the abuse of the sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church. And if you think that doesn't leave an impression on people in terms of how it shapes their faith, I got news for you. So older generations sort of had this inherent confidence and faith in institutions, where millennial cultures have grown up where institutions they're
suspect.
And rightfully so. I mean, they have all this evidence to say, wait a minute, just because you say this doesn't mean that it's what's behind the curtain.
Right.
And I think that
because the problem is not just the Catholic Church. I mean, as we've seen in the past couple of weeks, the Southern Baptist Convention, and we know very well that it's maybe not as rampant as what it is in Catholic Church, Southern Baptist.
Maybe.
As far as we know, but we know that other denominations struggle with these things too, and they try very hard to cover it up. Because it's not going to look good. It's going, we need to have, because it's just going to be another blemish on the face of the church or whatever. Instead of being honest about it, they cover it up, and that becomes that creates that environment of distrust, because eventually cover-ups get exposed. Yep. That's it. Sooner or later, a cover-up like that will get exposed.
And here's the reality we live in right now. Technology is booming. Information is booming. There used to be, you watch the news, the 6 o'clock news, or maybe you watch the 10 o'clock news. Now, I mean, I'm on Twitter constantly with news updates. So if something's happened in the world, I know like that. Now, the good thing is we have that information at our disposal. The bad news is that it turns over so incredibly fast that all the details don't always come out, or by the time all the details come out, we're on to the next. But there's so much information that those things that may not have been huge. Can you imagine what Watergate would look like today? I mean, huge scandal, and that was major news. And now, I mean, in today's world,
it's a scandal a day.
Right. Well, and there's 24/7 news coverage. I mean, so there's so much more stuff and information thrown out that makes a difference.
How often
as well.
you're like, oh wow, it was only Monday that X, Y, or Z happened and got a lot of coverage and whatever, but by Wednesday you've forgotten because of the news cycle. Forgotten everything that happened on Monday because some new thing has, replaced it, or a couple of new things have replaced it in that time span. And the rapidly moving information world that we now live in is, it's both a blessing and a detriment to how we continue to live with one another in society. And so trying to figure out then, how does the church, how does the Bible, how does faith, how does that work into just your average person's life? And I think finding that balance and finding that thing is really, really difficult, especially for our younger generation that, let's face it, they're not thinking about death yet.
Nope.
That's not on their mind.
Nope.
So they're looking at really what's religion and faith going to give me that the rest of the world isn't.
Right.
And in fact, it's going to stop me potentially from doing things I want to do. And that then becomes, and let's face it, when you've had parents that haven't been bringing kids to church, they don't learn it. I think one of the big disservices we did was when we took kids out of church.
Yeah.
Because when they went to, say, something like children's church, it was fun and games and it was all kind of stuff, but then they kind of worked their way out of that by aging out, so to speak, and then suddenly found themselves thrown back into an environment they were unfamiliar with, that they didn't feel welcome at. How many millennials do you think are single?
A lot.
Yeah. I mean, I know at least just in general, the population, this isn't millennials only, but I mean, 51, 52, something like that, % of the population is single. Do you know how welcoming a church is to the single population?
Not.
No. Not at all.
Yeah.
Being single, I can tell you,
Yes.
it is not a welcoming place. And it's a very scary thing to be walking into a place full of people all by yourself. And I mean, it takes a level of dedication, and I really want to do this. And part of it too is with the, for whether better or for worse, people's schedules. I can tell you right now, when I was 20-some years old, 30-some years old, getting up on Sunday morning, which was the one morning I had to not have to get up and do something, to then say, okay, no, now you have to get up and go to church where you're going to be bored, and this isn't going to relate to your life. I would rather just get up and do a Bible study on my own versus going to church.
I'd like to say that that's what I was doing in my 20s when I wasn't going to college, getting up Sunday morning and doing a Bible study by myself. But
I wasn't getting up in the morning and doing it,
Right.
but I would do a Bible study on my own. I then found a church when I was living in Pasadena that had Sunday evening services. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of it's not a Saturday, because let's face it, when you're still, 20 years old, you're still out doing things on Saturday nights. And so Sunday nights usually were that night of, hey, time to quiet down, get ready for your week. And that's actually what drew me back into the church. It was like, hey, this is a time I can go, and I don't, and I can sit and I can poo-poo the whole convenience thing all we want and say, well, it isn't about convenience. It isn't about what's good for you. And, it's supposed to be about God. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but, a selfish 20-something-year-old isn't going to think that way.
Well, let's look at the way society's trending in terms of convenience. If I want to go to the movies, I don't have to go to the movies. I have Netflix. Mm-hmm. If I want to go out to eat, I don't even have to go out to eat anymore. We have Uber Eats, and they will bring food to my door. So we're really skewing society towards convenience.
And I don't have to even go out and meet people to socialize anymore.
Nope, I can do it right on my phone. Now, interesting study also among across generations reports that the more people are active on social media, the more lonely they feel, mm-hmm. which is really interesting. But I want to get back to something you mentioned earlier, a few minutes ago, and maybe I think we need to confess this as a church. We've done a lot of this to ourselves.
Yes.
We have said, "Hey, kiddies, you go to children's church because we want to be quiet. We want a quiet space for worship." And then we've said, and which is inherently taught our young people, well, church is for the big people. You go do your thing, and then they don't grow up in the church and know how to experience worship. And that's because we've sort of reinforced that. We've also said church is on Sunday morning, and Sunday morning only, and if you can't make it Sunday morning, then you can't come to church, and that's tough. You should reprioritize. Well, the reality is businesses are now open on Sundays. There are very few businesses. I love Chick-fil-A. Love me some Chick-fil-A. They're closed on Sundays. Other than that, just about every business is open on Sundays. So if you have a job and have to work on Sunday, guess what? You can't come to church Sunday morning. What else has happened on Sunday mornings? Soccer, hockey, baseball, dance, all those things are also on Sunday mornings now. And as a church, we've said, church is Sunday morning, and if you can't make it Sunday morning, then you need to reprioritize your life. Instead of meeting people where they are and saying, okay, this is the reality of society, and we need to be flexible in the way we communicate the message. The message is constant. The message is still Christ. The message is central to the gospel. But the way we communicate it, the times we communicate it, we frankly as church, church with a capital C, need to be more flexible and less dug in on this is how we do things, and this you need to rearrange everything, quit your job, tell your job you can't work on Sunday because it's not realistic. I mean, I think the church has suffered from those things.
Yeah, and one of the final things too is the hypocritical, judgmental aspect of the church that I think drives a lot of people away. Mm-hmm. If you don't feel welcome because the church has made some kind of statement about you and who you are. I mean, I have had some horrifically horrible things said to me just because I'm a female pastor. Mm-hmm. That are, let's just say, not Christian to utter. I've had horrible, just awful things that have been said. I've been treated horribly. I've been called names, and people see that. And I'm big enough. I'm solid enough in my faith. I can brush it off, but in my earlier years...
Well, you shouldn't have to. I mean, let's just say that.
But in my earlier years, no. I mean, that was... You saw that, and you were like, I want nothing to do with that. Because the funniest thing I find is when I get people who tell me as a female pastor, they say things like, well, you're just following your own desires. And I'm like going, no woman looks at this job and looks at what she has to put up with and says, oh, that's what I want to do.
Ministry I love my job. Let me say that.
Yes.
Before I make a statement, I go, ministry is not a job that you do necessarily out of desire.
It's a calling.
I love my job. I love what I do. I love the people I do it with. But it is sacrifice, and it is it's a calling. It's not necessarily a desire in the sense of, I want to be this so I wanted to be a baseball player when I grew up because I loved baseball and I wanted to make lots of money, blah, 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 blah. That didn't happen. That's a whole other story. But it's more of a call. It's much more of a calling than a desire. Speaking of women in the church, the North Carolina Synod of the ELCA produced a video where they had male pastors read real life things that their female colleagues have heard in the church. And maybe we can link that in the notes if we can find it. I don't know. But it was powerful in a sense that it was men reacting. And honestly, I think if you're male clergy and you're not completely tone deaf, those things are said by your colleagues. And shame on us as male clergy for not calling out, say, hey, that's not appropriate. That's not okay. But that's a whole other story. But as young people, back to this millennial thing, and as we're kind of whipping on the church here a little bit.
Well, people wanted to know why. Why they're leaving. This is why.
Correct.
Yeah, these are the reasons why.
And I think we've kind of earned that. And I know here we preach love and we preach grace a lot. Mostly because I think it's really central to Jesus. When you look at Christ and you look at his ministry and you try and model that and you try to preach that, yes, there's law, but there's a lot of gospel.
There's a lot of reaching out to the people that you don't typically see in your standard pew. When you think of it, when you think of church and people that go to church, he was reaching out to not those people. Right. He was reaching out to the people that when those people, so to speak, come walking through the door, a lot of churches take one look at them and they're like, what are you doing here? You don't belong. I actually have had parishioners, not here necessarily, but I had parishioners say to me verbatim, this is what they've said. They have said, someone who doesn't belong is here. Yes.
And my question back right away is, I'm sorry, who doesn't belong here?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't belong in a church, then this should not be a church. I mean, that's the reality. There's no one that should not belong, should not feel welcome. Now, the reality is unfortunately, that's not the case. But I think if we're really gospeling and presenting Jesus and living it, not just presenting it, but living it, and again, that's one of the disconnects for our millennials. I see this, I hear this, but if this is your lifestyle, if you have tattoos and piercings, maybe you need to reevaluate your life. If you have addiction issues, your sexuality, your preferences in sexuality, and that's a whole. Well, maybe, and we get all caught up in those issues and forget that there's a person that God created that is across from us, and we start putting labels on things, and I've always struggled with the labeling part of society in general. So I was a psychology major in college. That was one of my majors, and I took my abnormal psychology midterm and I failed it miserably. And I went after that final and switched my major to marketing. And I didn't fully realize my issue until I did my chaplaincy work in CPE. When I did my chaplaincy work in seminary, I worked in a behavioral health unit. And I had one of the doctors come up to me and tell me the diagnosis of one of the patients that I was getting ready to meet with as a chaplain. And I looked at him and I said, I don't know why I need to know that as a chaplain. And it clicked at that point that my whole issue was I didn't want to have to label someone because it didn't matter, and to Christ it doesn't matter. And when people walk in our congregations, or when we leave our congregations, and hopefully we leave our congregations and are spreading the love of Christ and being Christ-like in the world, that label shouldn't matter. We shouldn't even see that. I know that we do, but we shouldn't even see that label, let alone pin it on someone as a reason they should or shouldn't be in church.
So basically, what I find rather miraculous is you said, 75% of millennials actually affiliate?
Yep.
I find that rather miraculous when you combine all of the reasons why they shouldn't and what would drive them away.
It says they're affiliated. It doesn't say they show up.
Doesn't say they show up.
And
Yeah.
that's one of the things that people get jumpy about. Well, why aren't they here? Well,
All of the reasons we just said.
yeah.
And so, of course, then the flip side of that then becomes, but we are a welcoming, open, and inviting church, so why aren't they just flocking to us?
Because we're welcoming and inviting to our own people. And I pay particular attention to this on Sunday morning. And a shout out to my home congregation pastor, Pastor Liz. When I talked to her, I led worship one Sunday, and I said, how long do I let the passing of the peace go? And she said, well, for one, if there's a new person, when they stop being greeted, you move it along. Because you don't want those new people not feeling like they're part of the in crowd, part of the
just
clique.
sitting there. Yeah.
It's the high school cafeteria again, where you have the kids that are sitting by themselves that nobody talks to, while everybody else is. And I think we're a very warm and friendly and welcoming congregation. I don't know that that's always the experience of our new people. Now, I know that some of you faithful Immanuel listeners will challenge that, and I'm going to challenge you back to say we can always be more gracious and more welcoming. And we have many lovely, wonderful, and gracious people that are indeed very welcoming.
And we have a lot that are very intentional about finding people they don't know and going up to them and at least shaking their hand, even if they don't fully introduce themselves. We're working on that.
Sure.
We're working on the whole introduction thing a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, that just goes back again to, especially if they're single, because I know multiple churches I walked into, no one spoke a word to me. Wasn't here, but when I was kind of, trying to find my way around, figuring this whole spiritual journey kind of thing out, there were a lot of churches that we would go to, unfortunately, many of them Lutheran, where you would stand there during their coffee hour or something, and not a single person would come. So they'd look at you and they would give you a funny look, like you don't belong here. And yeah, so then what happens? And my mom and I actually went to one of those one time up in Minnesota. I was looking for, we have something called Con Ed sites where you have to affiliate with a congregation while you're in seminary. And
Continuing ed.
Yeah, continuing ed. And I was looking for, and I was looking for my church. So we tried this one out, and it had this big sign on it that said, welcome,
All are welcome. That's like the famous tagline.
Whatever. Not a single person spoke to us the entire time. And
that's my least favorite thing to put on a church sign, by the way. All are welcome, because inherently we want to say that, but it's really not true. Yep. We want it to be true, but the reality is there's always someone that's going to walk in here that doesn't
feel welcome.
And we would love for that not to be the case. And scripturally, it shouldn't be the case. But that generic sign, all are welcome, is kind of overplayed and kind of BS, if you're asking me.
So the big question then is, of course, so what do we do about this?
Yeah.
How do we solve all of those issues and, reach out and somehow touch the single millennial population?
I've got it figured out.
Oh, cool.
We write our legislators and tell them that they need to reenact the blue law so that the only thing open on Sunday morning is church again. And then we write all the Little League baseball and Pee Wee football and soccer and dance, and say, you know what, Sunday mornings are for church only. Could you? I'm sure that'll work, right? Mm-hmm. No, okay. So the reality is that's very tongue in cheek, in case the sarcasm didn't quite come through. The reality is we have to be flexible. I think. What do we know about our younger generations? Technology is their life. So why are we not leveraging technology to reach our younger members in society? And then I think we have to go a step further. I think we have to take this notion of what it means to be community, an authentic community, not from a screen on your computer or your iPad or your iPhone, but tangible building of relationships. Because let's face it, we all want those healthy, meaningful relationships. And I'm not just talking, for our single people who struggle. I think we all need that sense of community and people to identify and connect with and build relationship. I think that's really important. And I think the absolute biggest thing, is to get away from the hypocrisy and to get away from this notion of we as Christians are the ones that are going to do the saving. Our job as Christians is not to save anyone. That happened on the cross years ago. I used to, whenever I would get somebody who would come up to me and say, so when did you get saved? Yes.
I would go, well, we're not real sure what the date was, but it was around 33 AD-ish, so somewhere in there. And they would just kind of look at me funny. And I was
that box was checked for me. Thank you very much.
Yeah. It's like, when did you get saved? Well, I got saved 2,000 years ago. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I think our job as Christians needs to be less about getting people saved, and we're sort of identifying our slant on salvation, our Lutheran slant on salvation. But hey, we're Lutheran pastors. What do you expect? I think we need to be less concerned about the salvation of other people and more concerned about spreading the love of Christ in the community, regardless of who, what, when, where, regardless of what label, what other people may call someone. So I have a quote.
It's about bringing people into relationship.
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite quotes, and unfortunately I don't know who I can attribute it to, so if you know, let me know. Be like Jesus, spend enough time with sinners to ruin your reputation with religious people.
Oh, I've heard that recently,
Yeah. It's one of my favorite sayings, and if we ask a lot of our church folks, they'll report back that, well, most of my friends go to church. I'm like, oh, most of mine don't.
Yeah, no, most of mine don't either.
And I think there's that notion that we need to be part of community and part of society, knowing that not everybody's a churchgoer, but the way that we reflect Christ and the way we engage and interact with people, not beating them over the head with the Bible, not dragging them to Christ, not scaring them to Christ, but loving them and compelling them to Christ. I think that's way more powerful, way more reflective of Christ's life. Christ didn't scare people. Christ didn't drag people to the cross. He died on the cross. And that act of salvation is much more compelling than telling someone they're going to hell.
Well, and I think that's part of it too, is the Christian image in society, and it isn't a good one for the most part, unfortunately, anymore. Which
Let's
is
just love
sad.
people.
Yeah, which is sad because our calling is to love people. Our calling is to take care of people, to care for them, not just their bodies and their souls, but that holistic approach of how you are caring for them. And if we just concentrated on how do we care for these people, and show them the love of Christ, then you open the door to being able to actually tell them about this wonderful Christ that is what motivates and what pushes you, and is what compels you to continue to love people even when they are your enemies or whoever it is, because that's some radical stuff, loving your enemies.
And you know what else we didn't talk about? And I can't believe we got 37 minutes into the podcast and didn't mention one of the other things for millennials. They want to make a difference. They want to change the world.
Right.
And as a church, if we're only here on Sunday mornings and not engaging in the community, that's a big thing. And I have no idea how we got this deep into the podcast and didn't talk about that facet. We as a church need to be engaged in the community, feeding the poor, clothing the naked. That's kind of biblical. And for many of our millennial folks, it's making a difference in the world. They desperately want to make the world a better place, not just for themselves, but for everyone. And I think the church, that's part of our mission. We don't always live it out well, but I think that's another aspect in terms of, I don't want to say attracting millennials, because that makes it sound kind of sleazy.
Like marketing?
And marketing. But hey, I have a marketing background, and so do you, so maybe there's something to that. But it's that notion of being the church in the world that makes a difference in the lives of other people, that is deeply, deeply, deeply scriptural and deeply attractional.
People see what you do.
Yes.
And that's what millennials base their opinions on. It isn't about how much you tell them, it's about what you show them.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, I don't have anything else.
I feel good.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Again, if you have any topic you would like us to cover that we have not yet so far in our whole whopping 3 podcasts that we've done, be sure to send them to us at ipccrackedpots@gmail.com. Thanks.